This little video should help you understand how to introduce evidence inside an essay. Before going any further, make sure that you have one of the Cornell Note handouts available and that you have a pen or a pencil to use so that you can write in it. You will be using that handout to help keep track of the information that you learn from this presentation. Once you have that handout in front of you, don't forget to put your name and the class period information at the top right-hand corner of your paper. Also include the date. At the very top of your paper, where it says topic and objective, write, properly using textual evidence, also known as quotes, into body paragraphs. Beneath the topic and objective box, there's another box called the essential question. The question you should put in that section is, how do I use quotes in my essay correctly? As you continue to work through the presentation, at the top of every slide, there's a question. So you will write those questions on the left side of your notes. And then you're going to put the answers on the right side of the page. The first question that you should put on the left side of your notes is, why is evidence important in an essay? To start with, one way in which you make an argument stronger is show that your ideas are supported by credible sources. It's really important to keep in mind that there should be more than one credible source if you want to make your point believable. So when you want to use information that comes from a source outside of yourself, for example, lyrics from a song or a quote from an interview or maybe something that came from a TV show or a lecture, anything. If you didn't create it or invent it or write it first, you must give credit to the source that it came from. I cannot emphasize to you enough how important it is to give credit to the sources of your information. When a person doesn't give credit to where they got their information from, this is called plagiarism. And plagiarism is a serious legal offense. And it can have a serious impact on you if you're caught. If a student is caught for plagiarism, that offense will go on their school record. And that school record goes to every college or university that that person might apply to. And in some cases, colleges or universities will not take a student who has plagiarism on their record. In addition to that, anyone who plagiarizes is at risk of being sued by the person or company or organization where that source came from. And most likely, in a court case, the person who plagiarized will lose, and they will be fined quite a lot of money. So please keep in mind, it is always, always important to give credit to your sources. The next question to add into your notes on the left side is, where do I put evidence into my essay? So it's super important to keep in mind the evidence only goes into the body paragraphs. It doesn't go anywhere else. The only place that you're trying to support the arguments that you are making is in the body of the essay. If that evidence only goes into the body of the paragraphs, then it does not belong in the introduction or the conclusion of an essay. So don't put quotes anywhere in that introduction or conclusion if those quotes are supposed to be the evidence to support your claim. In a complete paragraph, Your evidence should go after the topic sentence and the explanation, but it should go before the concluding statement. So let me try and illustrate this a little better for you. If this whole box represents a paragraph, then it's going to have basically 3 sections to it. So the topic sentence and the explanation go in the top part of that paragraph. And your evidence is going to go in the middle. So this is where your quotes go, right there in the middle. And then at the end of this paragraph, that's where you're going to see the concluding statement. In the part of your paragraph that includes the evidence, there are a couple expectations. First of all, you should have a minimum of 2 pieces of evidence. So that's 2 quotes. However, both of those quotes need to come from different sources. Let me try to illustrate this again. So if you remember that paragraph box, this represents the paragraph. And if you remember, we start with that topic sentence and explanation section. So in the middle part, it's supposed to be your evidence. But you're going to have evidence from 2 different sources. So here's evidence from source 1, here's evidence from source 2. But these still equal 2 quotes. Just 2 quotes from different sources. And then, of course, you do still sandwich it at the end with the concluding statements. The next question to put down on the left side of your notes is, how do I properly put the evidence into my body paragraphs? This is where it gets tricky. A lot of times, this is the part that I find students forgetting to do. So, when you have a quote, you always have to introduce the source. And in the case of research, you're going to have quite a few steps of things that you will need to remember to introduce to the reader. If you're wondering why this happens, it's because your reader needs to know that the information you're providing them is credible, that it's valid, that it's true. And so hopefully when you introduce your source, the sources you are using will actually have some sort of reputation behind them and make the reader have a better belief in what you're saying. For example, if you use a news source like the New York Times, then people are going to think, oh, that's coming from a well-established magazine or newspaper, and it is well known to have good reporters. But if you're just using information that comes from a blog somewhere and nobody knows the person who wrote that blog except for their friends, then the majority of people aren't going to consider that a credible source. There are a few things that need to be done to establish the credibility. First of all, you want to state who it comes from. So who is that source? Who is responsible for that information? The next part's a little bit more difficult because you want to also give a little more credibility by explaining to the reader what that person or company or organization is known for. By providing this information to the reader, it definitely emphasizes how reliable that source is. And you want to be seen as reliable in order for your reader to come to see things from your perspective. The next thing to make sure that you have in an introduction to your source is the titles of the source. So if it's an article, a speech, a movie, whatever it is, make sure you have the title there. This allows the reader to go to the original source and verify the information that you have used from it if they want to. When you insert a quote into your paragraph, make sure that you include quotation marks at the beginning and the end of the quote. When it's necessary, also make sure that you have an MLA citation at the end of the quote. It should be at the end of the quote, but before the period. The citation that you use should be in parentheses, and it should have only the author's last name and the page number where the quote was found. So let's look at this example quote here. We're just focusing on the citation piece right now. To indicate that there is a quote, you use quotation marks. That tells the reader where your information that you're borrowing is taken from and where it starts. And then you end that quote with quotation marks. That tells the reader where the information you're borrowing ends. So then after the quotation marks, always after the quotation marks, you start your parentheses, and inside of it, you have the author's last name, not the first, not the middle, just the last name. And then notice, there's a space between the last name and the page number. Don't use a comma, no commas, no commas. And finally, with that citation piece, notice that the period goes after the parentheses is closed. Just an FYI, if the source that you're using doesn't have any page numbers, then your parentheses would just have the author's last name. However, if you write in your introduction the author's last name and then you use that quote, you don't need to put any citation at the end of the quote. In this sample paragraph, we want to take a look at introductions to quotes and what they look like. So, first of all, just notice that we have an example that includes both a topic sentence for the paragraph, and then that's followed by an explanation for that paragraph. And that explanation happens to be 2 sentences. So the next part that should follow is evidence. And we've talked a little bit about how evidence is sandwiched in the middle of the paragraph. So if you remember, the first thing it said in introducing quotes is that you want to make sure to use the author's name. So we can see here that the phrase speaker, author, and coach Kurt Rosengren. So Kurt Rosengren is the name of the person for that first source. So before that quote was even used, the name of the person who said it was used. If you recall, one of the ways that you make your source reliable or credible is by explaining what that person is known for. So in this particular case, in the introduction, it says that Kurt Rosengren is these 3 things. He's a speaker, he's an author, and he's a coach. You also want to be sure that you've included the title of the source. So in this case, the title of the source is How Loving Your Job Helps You Succeed. And notice these quotation marks. Don't get confused. The quotation marks here for the title are just telling us that it's not a book. If it was a book, we would make sure to italicize. So the book's the one that's different. Remember how every body paragraph needs to have a minimum of 2 different sources? So in this example, we can see that a second author is mentioned. Amy Reese Anderson. So definitely, Amy and Kurt, not the same people. And to establish Amy Anderson's own little bit of credibility, we've added this information here, stating that she is a successful, that's great to know, successful entrepreneur and investor. And then the title of Amy's work is also included. So it's an article, and since it's not a book, quotation marks are used to identify the title of that article. Okay, so now it's your turn to work on adding introductions to your own quotes that you have chosen. Keep in mind the 3 important things that you should include: the name of the person or company or organization that said it, the title of the source that it came from, and what that source, company, or organization is known for.